the vendor roadmap can't be your roadmap. Your roadmap has to be business aligned. It's not conform the business to the vendor that you chose to do business with him, and they do or don't have those capabilities. Architect for consistency.
Welcome to Tata Communication Hyperconnected Journeys, the podcast where we explore how enterprises are reimagining their digital infrastructure to innovate, scale, and stay resilient in a hyperconnected world. I'm your host today, Jay, Regional Head of Enterprise Sales and Strategy at Tata Communications. Today, I'm joined by two amazing panelists, Jason Chan, Associate Vice President of Network Collaboration and Observability Services at Merck, along with Raj, our solution leader here at Tata Communications. Jason, Raj, great to have you both here.
Jay, brilliant to have you and host this brilliant podcast. And Jason, looking forward to the amazing discussions that we always have.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Fantastic. So today, for our listeners on the Hyperconnected Journeys, we have three segments. That's the way we have kind of constructed the overall flow of our content. Let me quickly start with the segment one. The segment one is all about the now scaling with purpose. So Jason, if I may start with you, given your extraordinary experience working and supporting the Merck global network and operations, with Merck operates at an extraordinary global scale, supporting critical research, manufacturing, and operations around the world. To set the context to our listeners, let's start with where things started as you see the Merck's network and collaboration environment right now. What are the priorities for ensuring reliability, security, most importantly, across such a complex enterprise as what you run today for Merck?
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for the question. I do have the privilege of leading Merck's global network. It is a fairly large network. And I've through my career, have operated, and ran and configured, multiple different networks, across multiple industries. But yeah, specifically for Merck, the way that I look at it, at least from a priority perspective, one, it's really architecting for consistency, but again, operating for locality, right? And, because we do have very different divisions, business units, that we do cater for. So for me, global standards, start with architecture, ties to policy, ties to how we, use our tooling. Again, as we really look at for network connectivity, really driving towards local breakout, a lot of optimization, either in regional hubs, local internet egress. We are in SD-WAN. We do use SD-WAN. We just recently deployed that, completely. And again, our use cases might be a little bit different from how we do research, some of our research facilities to manufacturing, and then, all of our enterprise office locations, if you will. One thing that kind of goes hand in hand with the network is always security, right? And so, part of my organization, we do handle, all of our firewalls, all of our, some of our security controls. So again, security is absolutely has to be nested and built into everything we do. We are on a zero trust journey, I would say. And I would say, we continue to turn the dial relative to making our environment more secure, right? Because our intellectual property obviously is very, very important to us. From just being competitive, and that is our advantage. And then I would say, the last priority, is probably the third tower of my organization, which is really around observability. Again, we're really trying to improve our maturity there. We've made great progress. There's, I would say the goal line keeps on going a little bit further, right? But, end-to-end visibility is where it starts, first classic requirement gathering relative to, how do we continue to mature so we can get to, which I'm sure we'll talk about, like autonomous operations, right, at some point.
Jason, if I can just, ask you a question on what you mentioned just now, and this is specifically to all the CIO friends that are hearing this podcast. Now, you would have gone through a journey, right, in terms of where you started, where you are today. Now, in that journey, what are the changes that you've seen? What you just spoke about is some amazing things that you have taken up in the last, I'd say, 3-4 years. But then you had a long journey, and in that journey, I'm sure there'll be a lot of learnings that you've had per se, right? So if you can just share some of the learnings in terms of things to do, not to do, uh, you know, some failures that you had, some checks that you did, which our listeners and the CIO friends that are looking forward to hear from you can pick up a few things.
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question maybe a little bit at a higher level. And what I mean by that is maybe not just my time here at Merck, right? So, I'll give a quick history about myself, and the reason I'll do that is, it'll probably become apparent in terms of, how I'm answering this question, right? And so, I don't know, I'm probably approaching 30 years in the industry. When I first started my career, which is which has probably formed who I am and how I think about this today, right? Um, so the first company I joined out of college was a company called Belcor, which was part of the AT&T monopoly breakup. I don't know if folks are very familiar with that. Back in mid '80s, AT&T kind of ruled everybody. It was too big, right? And so, the U.S. federal government broke them up into what was AT&T, which was supposed to be doing long distance, and then it had all the what they called the baby bells, right? That had they're part of the continental United States to look at, uh, the local exchange carrier piece. And then there were two, like, call it research divisions, Bell Labs, which a lot of folks, just know by name, like which was tied to AT&T, and there was Bell Core, the company that I joined, which was meant to really help the baby bells with interoperability research, um, just so again, so that there would be commonality and still integrations of services. And the reason I talk about that is it's sparks so much innovation between Bellcore and Bell Labs, right? And again, this is, now we're, I don't know how many decades removed from it, right? But if you really look at like the breakup of that monopoly, the innovation that came specifically out of the telecom space and the networking space, that's kind of what got me excited and kind of what's here today. I think I even have at least two like two IEEE standards that are out there, that have my name from us, as a contributor
Cool.
perspective.
I didn't know that.
Well, it's funny. I actually kind of forgot about that, right? Because I was kind of young and dumb and really wasn't sure what I was doing, right? But like, but so it started with twisted pair, like believe it or not, right? It was 2-wire twisted pair. When voice and data was separate. Again, I was working on DSL, at that point in time. How do you drive data across, what was traditionally two copper wires, right? That was meant for telephony. From there, I did leave Belcor. I was at Cisco for a number of years, and again, I was supporting large carrier base solutions that they were trying to sell into the market, which was really around DSL, cable, large ATM based networks. A lot of it, routing protocols that were supporting that. And it was also the start of voice over IP, right? Yeah, in terms of capabilities. And believe it or not, I mean, there's still twisted pair, across parts of the United States and in the world, right? Like, I know a lot of companies have been trying to harvest the copper for and replace with fiber. But the reason I share that is because again, it was kind of a building block for me right after Cisco. Working for a tech company was fantastic when I learned so much, but I did then join a conglomerate that was, headquartered out in New Jersey called Sendit Corporation. A lot of folks probably haven't heard about Sendit Corporation, but they own like over 50 different companies, right? Um, and those are the brands that people do recognize, all the car rental, the real estate, the hospitality, orbits.com at one point, right? Um, Jackson Hewitt Tax Services, and they own things that were aligned by industries, and they own things that were just pretty broad across multiple industries. It was probably my greatest learning moment because it was Sendent, and the group I was in within Sendent was meant to provide telecommunication networking services to the 50 plus businesses, right? And so the reason I say it was such a great learning moment is, again, you had companies that were either in the same industry or different industries, but they kind of all had the same problem, right? How do you provide networking, like at scale, at cost? Networking obviously including voice and contact center. I kind of mentioned, one of Merck's priorities that I just mentioned was, you know, architecture and center, but have like locality, at the edges. And that is really where, I saw that in Sendon, right? Because it's like, again, very similar problems. How do you drive cost efficiency, or, how do you move packets, being a network guy, like it's latency, jitter, and packet loss, right? The three ills of networking forever, right? And that hasn't changed, and ultimately to solve a business outcome, right? Regardless of, what that use case is. So adamant about standards, but it has to be fit for purpose, right? And so, again, you kind of fast forward, after, my time there, I was at Dell. I ran Dell's global network for, almost 7 years before joining Merck, for now it's going on 5 years, right? And so, yeah, I would say the the learning for me is have a really great network. And I'm not talking about the data voice network. I'm actually talking about the people network, right?
Thanks, Jason. I think that's an amazing point of view, right? I know it's great to see the journey, what you went through. For our listeners, the three key points, what I'm taking away here is the fit for purpose and the collaboration, how it does help to deal with the larger corporations in terms of, though it had a lot of other businesses, how the collaboration is going to get the simplification in when you deal with large enterprises, right? So that gives a good segue for me. If I move to you, Raj, given your depth of experience and engagement in the marketplace supporting large enterprises like Merck, so what are the, these, if you take a step back and assess the current state of network likes of Merck, what do you see the most often hidden complexity, what you see with as they prepare this transformation in large enterprises?
Oh, brilliant question. And I'm sure Jason will agree to me on this. Think about a large company like Merck. Uh, they will grow both organically and inorganically, right? And in organic growth, uh, what Jason talked about in terms of standards, uh, what Jason touched upon in terms of the fundamentals, and therefore a blueprint. I'm sure, Jason, you have a blueprint, a framework which defines. It's easier to control. But then when you grow inorganically, you go and acquire a company. There's mergers and acquisitions which are happening. Uh, Sometimes you do not get all the details, right? You may have 90% of the details, 10% may not be there. Many a times there'll be people who would be doing side projects and bringing in, some cloud instance, maybe a device here, maybe a device there. And many a times there'd be a project which is forgotten. So, Jed, what happens is in very large organizations, there would always be a bit of an unknown, right? And that unknown at times may cause havoc, whether it's a security havoc that Jason was talking about, or, it has no bearing into the overall scheme of things, right? It totally depends on the business needs, or who that device or what that device is touching at any point of time. If it is touching any business critical workflows, then it may lead to some kind of an issue. But if it is not, it will not, right? The other point which becomes interesting is that many a times, large organizations, which is global, which is multinational, the configs which is there, even if you have a reference architecture which is continuous, which is defined, the configs which go in may not be the same. The OS may not be the same. There are a whole lot of things which may come in. And therefore, what it starts from, say, for example, I walk into an office in Germany vis-a-vis in Germany, Frankfurt, vis-a-vis, say, in New Jersey. The experience for me may be different, and I'm not talking about a physical experience. I'm talking about a digital experience that may be different. To the fact that the security policies are different, and because there's a drift in the policy which is there, somewhere it is updated, somewhere it is not, which actually causes more issue, right? And Jason, what do you think about it? Do you see similar things in larger organizations? Is this a problem that you have faced in your past, per se?
Yeah, absolutely. The joke that we have, at least internal to our company, we're a 135-year-old company. So there's definitely some legacy, things that are still lingering around, right? I don't want to say they're 135 years old, but we certainly have different generations of infrastructure, processes. Of course, we'll go at it, through like life cycle efforts, modernization efforts, natural, pivots in technology. But at the same time, there are complex environments, that again just have not everything's the new and fancy, right? Not everything, has the ability, where we apply the modern practices, the modern DevSecOps practices. And then your point, you brought up M&A, right? And so, yeah, I think every company I've been with through my career, right, has been pretty active in M&A, right? And and Merck is no different. If anything, we're actually pretty aggressive even right now. And they all bring different size and scale, and the joys, right? Different standards, different architectures, different, again, maybe different life cycles. But the commonality, I think, for us obviously is achieving the business value, so we can help the business, right, achieve what they're looking for. But how do we do that securely, right? So again, just for us, everything has to be rooted back into just ensure that we're putting the right guardrails over roadblocks, if you will, and taking the proper risk-based approach.
Amazing. I think that's such an important connote, right? In my view, the complexity often hides in the plain sight, right? So that's the key point what Jason was trying to bring in. Thanks, Jason. So if I quickly move on to our next question, Jason. So Jason, you are responsible for delivering and operating a pretty extensive software-defined network. You did call out in the early part of your conversation, right? Which covers from data center all the way to branch locations. The question what I have for you is, how do you balance the need for the speed and flexibility, especially the compliance and the risk management, given the healthcare domain what you are in? So what is that 3 points would you like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say, being pharmaceutical, industry, there is obviously it is heavily regulated, right? At the same time, I think that we're able to move fast, because that honestly is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to release a new capability or functionality, right? We're trying to either close some security gaps, vulnerabilities, or we're trying to squish out, I would say, maybe known defects, bugs in our environment, right? And so our ability to move fast is really, foundational, so that our applications, our business processes, right, and our ultimate our business, can move faster. So the way that I look at that is really compounding like quality, right? And so for us, we do measure velocity by, the amount of changes that we can do. Every company I've been in, right, the change management process, the IT change management process, has always been maybe one of the most, I would say, despised processes, right? Because, there's a lot of effort, right? It's, you got to do a proper change, you got to go through a cab, multiple cabs, get approval and all that sort of stuff. Um, Proper validation absolutely is very important. Stakeholder, acknowledgement and approval and support is completely, absolutely important. Um, but the way to get through that, and at least that we've been looking at it, is really simplifying. I would say, the changes that we do, right, so that they're highly repeatable, known input, known output, makes for very easy change templates. You build a lot of trust. At the same time, that becomes a stepping stone to, hey, if it's not repeatable, then let's automate it, right? And you remove a lot of friction, right? Obviously, you still have to keep and maintain that trust, but you're able to move so much faster. Um, I think at least in the 4 years, or going on 5 years that I've been here at Merck, you know, at least 20x changes we're doing now per year, like compared to what we used to. And it absolutely is tied to automation, right? But you have to get there, right? And then you spend, the human cycles on really, okay, those complex changes that we need to like love these through the process, and have those conversations, with the business and again, build and maintain that trust, but also, have their support to move forward. And again, you have to be very clear in terms of, what's the value, right, that we're trying to deliver, right? It's they're they're not necessarily a victim of our change is kind of what I'm saying, right? They need to be a beneficiary of the change, and they need to understand that.
Just one question, follow-up question on this, Jason. You said 20x changes. Now, those 20x changes came with more manpower or the same manpower or reduced manpower? This is one question that I ask all my friends.
Yeah, scaling by adding more people is not necessarily the recipe for success, right? So it has to be, um, the right workforce, the right skill set. Um, and again, if I look at it from a total cost of ownership perspective, right? And so, I think, very, very specific to the company that I'm in, or at least, the operating environment. When I first came in, we had managed services is used quite a bit, right? Like, no offense to managed services, right? But used quite a bit, which was at least, in some cases, the more bodies, it was hey, you did more work, right? And so, part of kind of what I mentioned in terms of, okay, being very explicit in terms of automation goals, right? Pushed the how we do it, and also maybe what products we do use, right? To be, that are more, I would say, um, more automatable. I would, that's actually what really caused the shift. So yeah, so my, call it, run rate in terms of what I pay, right, either for external resources, full time bodies, tools and services, maintenance, licensing, all that sort of stuff is reduced, but like our throughput is much higher. And yeah, I've been building more of a internal aligned workforce than managed services, at least, in my particular case, right? But again, um, but it has to be driven by the outcomes you're looking for, right?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, balance is very important.
Absolutely. I love that framing, uh, Jason. I think, you clearly brought all the key points when you deal with such a large ecosystem, right? Ability to move fast, quality, frictionless. So those are all the key takeaways for our listeners, right? So again, the automation, you really touched upon how that's going to help us do the repeatable activities, right? So that gives a good segue for my next question. I think both of you touched on the visibility, right? So that's one of your roles and responsibility, which is observability, Jason. So I think that's one of the key needs, which we are seeing very common in the industry, with the AI scenario is how all the CIOs and the CTOs are looking to put more visibility into that. So if I may, Jason, the collaboration has become more mission critical for a globally distributed organization like you, right? So how the kind of tools what you've brought in over the last 5 to 6 years, more focused on the observability, how is that helping your the teams, which is globally spread across? I'm sure there are a lot of insights is helping to make your decision faster, right? So you touched upon the repeatable and frictionless. So how these tools are helping you more from the observability?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, so we've and my role's kind of changed a little bit over my tenure here. Again, when I first joined, I was responsible for the network and collaboration, ecosystem company, and again, so maybe very specific, like network observability and those sort of things. Last year, I do own, call it observability for across the IT landscape. So the reason I share that distinction, it is because we're still on that journey, right? Like we are still on a journey, even a mindset shift, because it used to be, especially, me coming from a heavy networking background, like I actually, of like some things have never changed over time, right? Like the network absolutely is guilty till proven innocent. Like that's just like we understand that, right? Every incident requires like, network representation. Like we completely understand that. But what I think is changing, and again, I'm still working on, my own team, with this mindset shift that used to be prove that the network innocence, mean time to innocence is, and there's a lot of, jokes and memes about mean time to innocence. Um, with my current remit, that's actually not good enough, right? It's, yes, the network might be innocent, or not at fault, but it's like, I need the company, or I need to provide the company, well, what is at fault, right? So it's, um, which is a much harder, a much harder problem to tackle, right? So yeah, we've made investments, and there's certain like, off the shelf tools that just, kind of help with some of this sort of stuff. Within our company, we call it our way of working, like, which is honestly that the bigger challenge, right? In terms of, um, here, are we even asking the right questions? Or do we have folks in roles that, they're incentivized to like, to care about it, right? Versus just saying, hey, not it, and just providing enough to say, hey, it's not it. And then, and then kind of working like in a siloed team, right? So, so that is like changing, we are trying to change there, right? So, it's less about, yeah, while each of our siloed teams might still have, their specific KPIs, that they're worried about, but at a higher level, it really is around like, I would say more of a recent term, like business observability, right? It's like, okay, like how does this all really line up into, business support functions? Of course, there's going to be lots of applications and infrastructure that supports maybe pockets and, that sort of stuff. But we have to like truly lean in on the business observability piece. Again, we have a long way to go, right? So by no means am I an expert on that. Yeah, I do know like, hey, that's the direction that we need to start thinking about. Um, and ultimately, as it translates into day to day, all the normal blocking and tackling, right? It really is correlation at root cause identification at scale, right? Like, the quicker that we're able to, um, use our platforms to correlate, if it's, metrics, logs, traces, flows, right? Like, distinguishing like endpoints and patterns, again, if it's across a network or app or, some of our SaaS providers, right? Like, and routing that to the right team that then actually cares, right? To do something more aggressively, right? So that's, uh, yeah, that's our journey right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, for the point of view on the observability. And I really like the point what you brought in on the business observability. That's a big shift what we're talking about. So if I may move to you, Raj, building on that, what Jason talked about how these observability tools are bringing the single pane of glass view and make their decision faster with the globally spread across team, right? So, if I may, Raj, how you are seeing observability emerge as a real differentiator in how enterprise support their collaboration and productivity at a scale, right? Especially, as you in your role deal with the complex global environment, helping those large enterprise in their transformation journey.
Sure. I'll take a leaf from what Jason mentioned. Uh, think about it like this: that enterprise, when they move into the journey of how they look at their uh, the automation, if I may call it, right? That's the word that Jason also used. It's a journey, and in that journey, there are four phases of the journey. The first is where you are reactive, then you become proactive, then you become predictive, and then you are cognitive, right? Everybody wants to be in the cognitive space, but companies are moving from, say, reactive to proactive to predictive to cognitive in a stepwise manner. When you're reactive, there is no observability out there, okay? But the fun starts when you start going into the next step, right? And that's where observability becomes very important. Think about it like this: that you want to be in the cognitive space, but then you do not have observability for all the points or all the things. If it is not there, you'll never be cognitive. Cognitive is where the network is, for example, self-healing. Or let's not talk even about the network. It's the digital infra that we are referring to out here, right? The digital infra becomes, self-healing, becomes self-aware, right? It can take steps even for the future. For example, it will look at a specific device and say, hey, this device may actually, shut down, say 7 days hence, because the core is heating up, or it has, one, two, three things that it is seeing at this point of time. What can I do to ensure that this device doesn't fail? And if it is really going to fail, then can I replace it in the next 7 days, right? So observability becomes extremely important in the whole scheme of things when you want to move to a cognitive space. And with AI coming in and the way the networks are going to become extremely complex, which is also a point, Jay, that you touched upon, this will be a fundamental building block. One of the things that, again, Jason touched upon in the first section of your questions. The fundamentals, right? Observability, in my mind, is a fundamental thing which should be there to the nth level.
Great, amazing point of view, Raj. Exactly. So to our listeners, so the observability is just not about the visibility, right? It is about confidence at scale, right? So the key point, what I'm taking away here is the trust point. What we are talking about is going to be huge. That's the journey what we are in. Thanks, Raj, that bringing that proactive to reactive to cognitive and so on, right? So that puts us in a good segue for us to move to the segment 2. Jason, now you have clearly led these large-scale network transformations, and you did touch upon the 20 exchanges, what you kind of went through in the last 5 years, right? But really what it stands out, how intentionally you have helped your teams evolve alongside this technology, right? So every time when you bring in a change, it is important to, have your team, come up with that confidence, right? So that puts us in a good segment too for us. The thing what we wanted to touch upon here is then versus now, right? What is the transformation story? How are we bringing the people into this conversation when we talk about this technological change, right? So Jason, earlier in your career, you did touch upon the amazing things what you did with the Bell and other organization you touched upon, right? The question what I have for you here is, earlier in your career, networks were often designed with stability as a primary goal. And now we talked about all the, the observability and the visibility, what we talked about, right? How was your mindset as networks become more dynamic, software driven, and directly tied to the business outcome. So when you did touch upon the business observability, I really like the term. So can you help me, more on that point?
I would say from a networking perspective, most companies, build networks for redundancy, right? Dual carrier, dual hardware, right? Up and down the stack, everything from the WAN all the way through, right? Now, I would say, from the mindset shift, most IT outages are still, choose your percentage, right? Caused by change, right? Sure, ISP circuits go down, right? In the network space, hardware fails, right? That sort of thing. And again, if you're built for redundancy and resiliency, then ideally, right, like you don't really impact the business at all. But again, if I go back to the human induced, right, again, even if it's an automated job, right, like, but again, a planned change, right, that is either known or unknown to some, or maybe has a unintended outcome, right, that maybe wasn't expected. Again, I think it's really getting past that, right? And I've been through many companies, right? Where especially in, I would say, like, certain parts of the environment, like, if it's core data center, if it's core manufacturing, or whatever the primary business process is, it's I mean, how many companies have done like change freeze, right? Like change freeze over as a result of maybe just some recent bad outages, maybe it's over, yeah, tied to certain, peaks and seasonality, that sort of thing. That the whole concept around a change freeze is, uh, hey, I don't want to say we don't necessarily trust you, but like, hey, we just know when no one's touching anything, like we're gonna have some stability, right? Like, um, so again, it's kind of going back to, building that trust, doing more through automation. It's like it's a lot smaller changes, right? Um, more changes, more frequent changes, more smaller in scope, right? Easier to test. You could do blue green, canary type of deployments, that sort of thing in areas, right? So I think that alone, I think has been the biggest push, right? To move, call it more modern software driven business aligned networks, right? Like, because to be able to do that, you also need, have chosen the right platforms, the right vendors, right? Like, that are capable of doing that, where not everything is, again, just CLI based, right? Like, and hard to automate, right? Because ultimately, and I've done this, like, you have to pivot away from those vendors, right? Ultimately, like, the vendor roadmap can't be your roadmap, right? Your roadmap has to be business aligned. It's not conform the business to, the vendor that you chose to do business with, and they do or don't have those capabilities, right? Like, ultimately, that's the first sign of, as much as I think I started, this conversation in terms of, architect for consistency, but it also means like, um, again, we have to be business centric, customer centric, and our standards. I'll be honest, if they're not fitting and solving the business challenge, and those are the first things that I'll throw away, right? It's so, because we're ultimately I'm not doing my job at that point.
Like, thank you. To our listeners, I think it's a great point what Jason brought in, right? All the initiatives what we are looking at has to be a business aligned, business outcome oriented. Then it drives the right, you know, uh, engagement internally, and bringing the team together with those changes is going to be easy when you have every engagement is more business alignment, right? With that, Raj, if I may, from your point of view, when what you have seen when you are doing such changes, how your customers are bringing those team when they are doing that large transformations and bringing the new technology, how they are bringing the team together. That is the center of everything, for these transformations, right? So, what's your point of view on that?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the most interesting things that I've heard from one of my CIO friends is that you'll have a strategy, right? That strategy will have, as Jason mentioned, OEM changes or tools coming in or processes changing and so on and so forth. But with that, what becomes extremely interesting is what is the culture of the team, right? Now, if the team has a culture of accepting changes, if the team has a culture of agility, the whole thing becomes very easy, right? At that point of time, you don't have to really think about adoption. Which becomes a massive challenge here, by the way. You bring in something new. Adoption is one of the biggest challenges that I'm sure Jason also agrees, right? uh, Thinking about new processes, if you do not shift from the old processes to the new processes, way of doing things, if you do not shift, if you do not accept, new technology, if the culture is not shifting, or if the culture is not shifting, if the culture of shift is not accepted, then the whole change becomes very difficult. It takes more time. There are a lot of heartburns which is going to happen. But then, if the team is agile, if the team is flexible, if the team says, "Hey, let's do it, right? Let's get to the next big thing. Let's embrace change." The whole thing flows like a seamless, buttered thing per se, right? So I would say that technology is very important. The team culture also becomes very important, and I'm sure Jason has built a winning team which is doing that. Otherwise, 20 exchanges will not be possible.
Yeah, thanks, Niraj. I think, Jason, if I expand on that one point, one of the key thing what we keep hearing is investing in skills also, right? Raj did touch upon the culture and the resiliency what we are trying to bring in when we are talking about these changes. So, can you talk to how critical this investing in these skills in this AI world, right? How critical is that going to be?
I'll be honest, right? Like I'm privileged to lead, the organization that I lead. There's not a meeting I walk into where I think I'm the smartest person, right? Like if anything, I'm, my job as a leader is to kind of get out of the way, right? At least, maybe point in a direction, but I'm not creating the full map, right? So yeah, and I will get to your question relative to skills, but I think what has been an enabler for um, myself and my organization, we are in a product model, right? It's not perfect, right? But we are in a product model, and there's only maybe two things I actually care about, outside of the big dictionaries in terms of what a really good product team looks like, right? But the two things I care about are, one, clear accountability, responsibility, and two, it's like the customer centricity, right? So, like, why does your product exist? Are you talking to a customer? Like, it's not you build it and they will come and they're going to love what you build, right? Yeah, it has to be, for like something tangible that's measurable. You can get feedback on in terms of like you're knocking it out of the park, or you're swinging and missing, or like you need some capabilities added, right? And they have to be responsible and own it. And part of that responsibility is kind of going back to roadmap. Like they need to define their roadmap in terms of, okay, how do I solve the business challenge? And using what I mentioned relative to, consistent architectures, locality, division alignment, right? Just again, knowing the nuance in terms of who and how we're supporting, specific customers, because again, we have a very diverse customer base. But it's then pushed in terms of those product teams um, have that ownership to solution, right? And yes, part of my job obviously is also to kind of like nudge folks and nudge team to move a little bit faster, because again, we do need to support our business, today, right? And so what becomes clearly like evident is relative to, hey, do we have the right skill set, right? Either today, is a skill set that we want for tomorrow, right? Absolutely. We have to be very mindful and cognizant relative to people aspirations or career aspirations. We obviously, like many companies, we have folks in all sorts of different walks of life, different grade levels, all that sort of stuff. And you want folks to have a career path, right? That's defined, but at the same time, they have to also embrace and you know, um, help dictate where they want to go with their capabilities. And the reason I say we're in a product model is because our products will change over time, and they have changed over time, right? What might be defined, as something that, hey, we need this now and we need it for 2-3 years. Some of them actually might just be done after 2 or 3 years, or there's a natural progression and it morphs into something else, right? And we'll call that product something else. But that helps us look at it in terms of how we're supporting, again, our customers pretty specifically, but also for me, if anything, it's actually made my job a little easier, right? Because again, the products are, if they're done well, they're pretty self-sufficient. Again, with the right metrics, to help ensure that we're, business aligned, right?
Cool. Thanks, Jason. I think the key takeaway for our listeners is the investing in skills is just as critical as investing in platforms, right? Jason did touch upon the culture and accountability, customer centricity. Define the roadmap when you are doing those transformation story, and most importantly, get this aligned with the business outcomes, right? So, thank you, Jason. Amazing point of view, and I'm sure this is going to really help us, our listeners, look at the transformation engagement in their own organizations, right? That puts us in a good segue to move to the segment 3. Now let's look forward, because the future of network is being shaped now, right? What we talked about, the observability, and we talked about the AI and ML, how that's bringing that single pane of glass view, how that is empowering the business outcomes for our enterprises, right? So with that, Jason, if I come to you, as you look ahead, how are you positioning more network and observability platform to support more automation, intelligence, and real-time decision making, right? So you broadly covered that. If I could, high level summarize, in this context, that will be helpful for our listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, for us, we've been making a very large push in terms of managing as much of our environment, as code, right? So, the infrastructure is code, validated designs, working with some of our, core suppliers. We're not exactly there. Like, I'll be completely honest, right? Some, again, as I mentioned, may or may not have native capabilities, right? Some kind of make it hard, or some, we have to, do our own, scripting and, a lot of Ansible, a lot of Terraform, like, that sort of stuff. Um, you know, but at the same time, we have invested in platforms where from the get-go, we only deploy as code, right? So, that alone just, it brings the quality, it brings, like, I would say, how do we interact with it as, like, practitioners of managing it, but also, how do we actually move some of those capabilities directly to, some of our consumers, our software developers, right? And again, so we move to, I would say, I want to say an API first, right? But we're definitely trying to get there. Especially in some of our high volume, areas, right? Like within networking, no surprise, right? Like the largest volume stuff that we always see are all day, every day DNS requests, a lot of firewalls, a lot of certs, a lot of load balancing, right? Like all these things that application teams need, right, or platform teams need, right, to stand up and initiate their services, right? So the more that, hey, that's not a service nav to get into an individual team queue to now either one manually do today, tomorrow do the automation. It's like, hey, how about that's all self-service, right? And we'll go have coffee, right? And like while they, have a more natural experience within their IDE, faster delivery, And again, that's honestly how, we're actually doing more changes, right? Is because of self-service, right? And so that's how we're really pushing, our automation, which, especially as we get into now, AI, right? Like agentic AI, autonomous operations, like, that's at least for us the natural progression, right? So again, the more that we're able to, um, standardize, what used to be manual changes to automated changes to now like self-service changes with an API, then yeah, we can let AI agents go crazy. Of course, like we're not to that point yet, but that is the progression for us, right? I would say autonomous operations, right?
Interesting. That's exciting. Thanks, Jason. I think, the key takeaway for us here is using intelligence not just to respond faster, but to anticipate what's coming in our way, right? So if I may move to you, Raj, what are you seeing enterprises get the most immediate attention and the value from this automation and analytics in the network operations today? I guess broadly, Jason did touch upon the kind of intelligence what these tools are bringing in for their fast decision making. So can you throw some light from your broader industry experience and how you see the customers likes of Merck?
Sure. So the first thing is I loved something that Jason mentioned, and not a lot of people are actually going that way. He's obviously in the cutting edge already, right? Which is infra as a code. For a lot of people it's but obvious, but not many are moving into that space. That being said, the way I look at it is that the network as we know today, the infra as we know today, the digital infra that we have defined for today is going to have a very, very, very dramatic change going forward, right? Uh, when we think about the applications of today, they are defined for humans. Applications and the network and the digital infra of tomorrow will be defined for humans and agents, right? So I'm sure we are all looking at agentic web. We are looking at agentic flows and so on and so forth. And it's but natural. I'll give you an example, okay? Some time back, 1 million tokens was $20. Today it is 50 cents per million tokens. But all the LLM providers are actually seeing a growth, right? We are talking about trillions of tokens per month, if not more, or per day. I'm forgetting it's crazy numbers at this point of time, which means that's going to have a material impact on the way our digital infra network and so on and so forth looks like. And I don't think enterprises are ready at this point of time, right? So there'll be a shift change in terms of the way you look at things, the way you do things, the way you define your observability and so on and so forth going forward, right? So with that as a background, the human network will remain the way it is and move forward in a, I'll say, in an incremental manner. But then the transformation change will come about because of the agentic, and they will all merge together, right? In today's world, we talk about three segments when it comes to network from a very high level. But in tomorrow's, agentic plus human, there will be minimum 5-6 segments that you'll have to talk about, think about, and really go after, right? So, interesting times. And by the way, when I'm saying tomorrow, it's not like 50 years down the line. It's like next 2-3 years, right? By 2027, agents will be all over the place. I don't know how many agents Jason himself is making, but on an average, a enterprise like Merck will have hundreds, if not thousands, of agents, and individually, me and you will have 2-3 agents.
Okay, that's a very strong point, Raj. Thanks for sharing. It's a lot of great point. How we should look at when we are looking at future, right? How we should, get ourselves aligned on the future thinking and bring those innovation. And to Jason's point, always align with the business outcome, right? So with that, I quickly move on to my next question to you, Jason. This is going to be our last segment. Jason, looking at we did talk about quite a bit of the transformation story, how you're bringing people and the process and the automation, as a game changer in this conversation. Obviously, I'm aligning more towards the business outcome and bringing the business observability into that context, right? So looking at 3 to 5 years from now, how do you see the role of network collaboration and observability teams changing within the large enterprises, right? So that will gives a good summary of what we talked about in the last 45 minutes, if I may, Jason, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, in 3 to 5 years, right? This is my hope, right? That it's more ubiquitous, right? In terms of, I would love to get to, a single, like, logical, I don't know, like, high throughput, right? A networking fabric that helps support our different workloads. And the reason I start there is we're again, we're kind of built, for that. Again, there's some legacy, and just normal life cycle in terms of how we can remodel some places, right? But if we can get there, nested in with security at its core, not to call it a later bolt on, right? Like which is kind of like how some of that's happening now. Again, we're on a zero trust journey. Again, we keep on turning the dial, right? To be, I would say, further secure. Um, but it is a bolt on, right? And so again, once we can get it, I would just say native into the environment. Then yes, then absolutely integrated observability, automation. Those are non-negotiables at that point, right? And then I know I've used the term autonomous operations, right? But that's that's coming soon. Like it really is, And so yeah, we talked about some of the agents and all the different use cases, that we're looking to do. Again, we'll I would say co-pilot that until we have certain comfort levels. But again, we're diverse enough where um, that there are certain use cases or certain site types, certain user profiles that I don't want to say we can take more risk, but but we could take more risk, and then certainly as it gets closer to maybe more of our crown jewels, mission critical applications, ecosystems, then yeah, we'll maybe have to have a few at bats, first, right, and build a little bit higher trust. But that's how I think we're really going to see it, right? Again, coming back to just deep collaboration. I think you know, both either from a network perspective, observability perspective, or even our collaboration suite. Um, I kind of joke that for the last 3 decades, I've been a plumber, right? You know what I mean? In terms of it's just foundational. Like expectations are there. There's a lot that obviously has to go on. But that's like we need to provide that plumbing. We need to provide those capabilities. So again, we can push again that the business aligned conversations, the co-development, the solutioning, right? So I do see, in terms of what we do and how we do it, it's going to be less on like the day to day, kind of checking interfaces and all that sort of stuff, and health checks, reconciling environments, and like that stuff will be pretty, I would say, self solvable at least, hopefully, and then we can actually have um, folks really, really co-development, like truly co-developing in terms of um, how do we help our company, I would say do drug discovery faster? How do we do, help with the clinical trial process? How do we manufacture? But like, our entire supply chain. How do we move large amounts of data, which that our research labs generate, right, so that they can use that for again all their AI, ML initiatives, right? And so, um, it's the same business challenge, but I think how we show up and what to work in a couple days, and how we have our workforce, thinking about things like it will be significantly different.
Great. Thanks. That's a powerful way to close, Jason. Thanks. Amazing point of view. So Raj, what's your view, how you look at the 3 to 5 year horizon, as you going to help the large engagement with the enterprises?
So first thing is that I totally agree with what Jason mentioned, right? In this, one of the other things which is very important is ensuring that we're kind of ready for tomorrow. And when I say ready for tomorrow, ready for anything, right? Tomorrow may throw a different challenge, which will come out of the blue. But we should be as a culture and as a team should be strong enough to stand up and say, hey, let's take it up. That being said, there are a lot of things that we know are in the horizon, and we should start getting ready for it. We spoke about a few things through the last 45, 50 minutes. And a few other things which are going to come up are likes of quantum, which you should look up to, because quantum has not only implications from a compute perspective, but also has a huge implication when it comes to security and going forward in the network space also, right? So look forward to those things because it will have an impact on the digital infra per se.
Thank you, Raj. And that brings us to the end of the episode, Hyperconnected Journeys. A big thank you to you, Jason, for sharing how Merck is modernizing its network while investing in people and process and automation and other things which you greatly touched upon. And to Raj for offering the broader industry perspective, what you bring it to the table, right? To listeners, we hope this conversation gave you a glimpse into how enterprises are building resilient networks, leveraging IoT and empowering collaboration to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. Don't forget to subscribe. Join us again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you,
Jay.
Jason. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, guys.